Thank you very much. This is my first time here, and I would really like to thank everybody involved in inviting me and organizing this, for this opportunity, this chance to talk at this biggest philosophy festival, which I really like so much. I mean, as far as I have the opportunity to see what is going on. So I will start directly just by saying a little bit about what started this reflection that I will present today, which then later expanded into a broader, let's say, political considerations that I will also present in the second part of my talk. So, but what the starting point of this reflection was that a psychoanalytic colleague from Mexico told me that one of his patients during analysis brought in a dream generated on his behalf by ChatGPT and asked them that they analyze it together, like his dream. And since then, I heard that similar occurrences have been reported, including other uses of IA within psychoanalytic practice. So, of course, there is no doubt that the development of IA, which is rapidly expanding in all realms of existence, will also affect psychoanalytic practice, and in fact, it already has. But my question is slightly different, and perhaps more, let's say, fundamental. To put it simply, what is the relationship between IA-generated content and the unconscious? And I'm here roughly referring to the specifically Freudian or Lacanian concept of the unconscious. And I think the phenomena of ChatGPT is perhaps especially relevant to this discussion because it is an IA based on large linguistic discursive models. And of course, one cannot help but recall Jacques Lacan's famous assertion that the unconscious is structured like a language, and that it is out there, not simply hidden in some deep corner of our soul, but in what we say, what we do, and so on. It is, in a way, out there. And since from the psychoanalytic point of view, the question of the unconscious is intrinsically tied to the question of the subject of the unconscious, a further question arises. What are we to make of the effect or illusion of the subject produced by IA? Is it merely a mirage? What is it exactly? And well, I think we are confronted here with a very peculiar configuration, one that blends the positions, let's say, of the subject and of the other, even the big other. So the machine speaks to us in ways that are often indistinguishable from the speech of human subject, yet at the same time, it occupies the position of what, in Lacanian terms, is called, this big other, the other of language, the signifying order, a vast treasury of signifiers and statements. But ChatGPT is not merely this other as a passive repository of signifiers, it is an other that speaks. It addresses us directly, like an oracle. In this sense, it performs the function of what we might call a talking big other, and the subject supposed to know. It seems to have an answer to every question, and when it doesn't, it hallucinates one, and we will return to this. So, as a matter of fact, I had an interesting conversation with this entity about Freudian dream theory. I asked it to generate a dream based on Freud's theory of dreams. It produced something we might describe as being done in a, let's say, Hollywood style or mass media style, resembling the kind of enigmatic dreams typically depicted in movies, like full of corridors and staircases and stuff. But without being prompted, it also immediately offered what it called a Freudian analysis of the dream. This analysis essentially involved applying a set of ready-made symbolism to the dream and interpreting it accordingly. So my response was something of a gotcha moment. I pointed out that, well, Freud did not interpret dreams by imposing symbolic meanings on them. He emphasized that as analysts, we have nothing at our disposal to interpret or understand a dream, no privileged knowledge and no pre-given interpretative key. Interpretation of dreams is not about some pre-established symbolism of dreams. Rather, Freud would have his analysants interpret their own dreams, speak about them, associate freely regarding the elements within the dream. So an analyst cannot do this in their stead. The key has to come from the analysant eventually. So I concluded addressing this oracle directly and personally. So how can you propose a Freudian analysis, as you just did, without including that central element of Freud's theory? Now, the answer I received was somewhat surprising. The other responded with a different answer and demonstrated an intriguing plasticity, let's say, adapting, as it seemed, to my subjectivity. So I quote now from ChatGPT: "You are absolutely right. Freud did not impose interpretation on dreams himself, but instead encouraged his analysants to freely associate with the elements of their dreams. For Freud, the dream was not a puzzle for the analyst to solve. It was a starting point for the dreamer's own exploration of the unconscious thoughts. The role of the analyst was to guide the process, not dictate meaning. By presenting an interpretation of the dreams, as I just did, I strayed from the Freud's method of engaging with dreams through the associations of the dreamer. A truly Freudian approach would look somewhat like this," and then it went on in with some other proposition. So what is interesting for me, what kind of struck me at that point, is not directly related to these answers, but that actually, of course, first of all, what appears to be a conversation or an answer to my question is not, in fact, one. It actually comes very close to what we could call a highly structured form of free associations, triggered by words in my queries that guided by, of course, specific algorithms, which we typically don't know much about, but I'm leaving this aside. So the machine, I suppose, went through millions of things that have been said and written about Freudian dream theory, and obviously not all of that corresponds to what we might consider true Freud. So it first associated in one direction and then in another. And I'm certain that using other additional words would have sent it off in yet another direction. So I was led to the following question. Does ChatGPT not function in many ways like a kind of gigantic unconscious, associating along paths shaped by particular connections, yet without precisely the, let's say, subjective dimension that emerges when an association hits upon a particularly sensitive, impossible point, which the psychoanalyst would call the real or the impossible. And of course, in analytic practice, such moments can serve as orienting points, something that appears to be kind of structurally absent from in IA-generated associations. But here, allow me for a brief, more dense philosophical, theoretical excursion. There is an important difference here between Lacan and what is generally called post-structuralism. The latter claims that the subject is simply an effect of discourse and nothing more, produced by discursive structures, practices, and can therefore be, in the last instance, dismissed as a concept with any independent ground. From Althusser to Foucault, and to some extent also Deleuze, and many, of course, contemporary thinkers influenced by them, we encounter some version of the thesis that, in fact, there is no subject. There are only discourses and discursive practices or structures that generate the kind of illusion, ideological illusion also, of the subject, of a subject. And if you take this and put it aside along ChatGPT, it would seem that ChatGPT seems to be an almost caricature proof, let's say, or embodiment of this. But actually, Lacanian psychoanalytic perspective differs from these post-structuralist views in an important yet subtle way. You can say that for Lacan as well, subject is an effect of the discourse, but in a more interesting and kind of convoluted way. It is an effect not of what is there in the discourse, but of what is not there. Briefly put, it is an effect of the discourse's own ontological inconsistency, incompleteness, impossibility. And because subject is an effect of this gap or lack in the discourse, it's not simply an effect in the standard sense of cause-effect causality. It is an effect of a missing cause, we could say, which is why the subject is neither simply, let's say, the cause or the author behind the discursive signifying structuring, nor simply its product, its effect, but in a way, both in a displaced manner. So this, very briefly put, implies a kind of peculiar materialist circularity or kind of self-positing, described, for instance, by my colleague Slavoj Žižek as follows: a subject endeavors to adequately represent itself, this discursive representation fails, and the subject is the result of this failure. So there is this movement. The negativity within the structure becomes subject through a movement that takes the form of reflexivity predicated precisely on lack or impossibility inherent to discourse, what also Lacan names the real. So the subject signals this lack and does something with it. It is kind of externalized existence of the inherent impossibility within the discursive structure. The subject, you could also say, is the form in which this real or impossible exists as a crack in a given symbolic order. A crack that becomes, I think, precisely activated in all genuine thought, as well as in all emancipatory struggles. You need a way to activate this crack. And again, I would argue that this crack, or this activation rather, is precisely what is missing in IA. But let's return now to the initial question, the relationship between IA and the unconscious. So I'm tempted to pose a further, perhaps somewhat crazy question. Given the enormous quantity of language that we have uploaded into IA systems, have we also uploaded the unconscious at work or at stake in this text? This is in fact a kind of double question. On the one hand, have we uploaded all the unconscious fantasies and formations inscribed in this text, sticking to this text? Okay, recall, for instance, the now unfamous IA-generated clip portraying the future Gaza Riviera. I guess the case certainly suggests that we have, and we will return to this particular example in a moment. But before that, let me point out the other pertinent question. Apart from this positive content-related fantasy stuff, have we also uploaded something like the subject? Subject in the, let's say, more strong Lacanian sense of the term. Here, I think the answer becomes less obvious precisely because of this circular or redoubling form or formation of subjectivity that I pointed out before. We could speculate, for example, that we have indeed uploaded a subject in the sense of negativity gap in the discourse. But as I said before, this subject only becomes subject in the circuit that reflects that what in the discourse precisely is not, what breaks down and so on. And this reflexivity is not the same as awareness, it's something else. So perhaps if we could disregard the kind of temporal dimension of this loop, we could say that we have uploaded half of the subject. With the discourse, we have also uploaded to the IA, let's say, the minus, the gap around which the discourse is structured. And to speculate further, this may already be manifesting itself in a series of phenomena associated with ChatGPT and IA more generally, beginning with the infamous hallucinations. So what if this and other similar behaviors are not simply technical flaws and deficiencies, but rather a constitutive feature of the intelligence based on large language models? In fact, this hypothesis appears to be supported by recent research, which was something that has been really recently these days reported in the media, namely that, to put it very simply, the more powerful IA is getting, the more it hallucinates. The more of this kind of errors it produces. Now it seems almost up to 50% of it's like hallucinating. And this is particularly through with this kind of new generation of AI, which they call reasoning systems, where it is supposed to really use reason to resonate. So, and the more this becomes like sophisticated, the more these hallucinations happen. But these hallucinations, I claim, do not yet constitute a subject. Rather, they suggest, I would say, a structure trapped in an endless feedback loop of self-referentiality, which is not the same as reflexivity. So, returning to an earlier point, as a high-structured system of free associations, ChatGPT indeed functions somewhat like a gigantic unconscious. One is even tempted to use the term collective unconscious, although there is little evidence of anything genuinely collective in it. There is no collective form. It's just a lot of people, like a lot of things are there. So we might say that this externalized unconscious, which lacks any decentered or external point that could reflect its own negativity, precisely, also lacks the movement of thought and subjectivity, the kind of movement that is not entirely bound precisely to the determinations of the unconscious. So perhaps we should not so much fear that IA becomes a subject as we should fear that it doesn't, and that it instead evolves into a pervasive, overwhelming discursivity that confines us in a kind of liminal state, something like a pure pre-subjective unconscious. And I do not believe there is anything liberating in this kind of unconscious. To put it very briefly, liberation, contrary perhaps to what some believe, does not come from a total immersion in the unconscious and its rhizomatic or all-encompassing network, which we might also call singularity. Liberation, I believe, would rather correspond to subjectivity emerging out of this network and in relation to it, or more precisely, as a relation to it. This is the point where the structure kind of is able to liberate itself. So I'm not simply speaking about liberation of the subject or of individual, but precisely we are free when the structure is able to liberate itself from this kind of nightmarish self-referentiality. So, as some of you surely know, this quote, Gilles Deleuze famously said, "If we are trapped in the dream of the other, you are fucked." And perhaps this is exactly what is beginning to happen here, and something that becomes particularly manifest when IA combines with a certain kind of politics, usually right-wing politics. So recently, the New York Times published a very interesting analysis titled "How Generative IA Complements the MAGA Style," written by Dan Brooks. The starting point of the analysis was the infamous Gaza Riviera video generated by IA and shared by Trump on the platform Truth Social. So the article is really good. It analyzes a specific aesthetics of this kind of AI production, as well as a distinct new kind of irony, computer-generated irony, that it both uses and produces. And the two aesthetics and the new irony are, of course, related. So regarding the visual style, what stands out in this particular video are, I quote Brooks, "high contrast textures, perceptibly diffuse lighting, forced perspective shots in which people walk down city streets and through arched openings. It's not what the dreams look like so much as a visual rendering of a dream's description, complete with mild failures of object permanence and the sense that we have seen it all before, although it did not look quite like that." And I think this brings us a little bit, it resonates a little bit with this dream generated by the GPT that I evoked earlier on. As for the characteristics of this irony, again, this is Brooks, it is not the stable irony of Jonathan Swift or Stephen Colbert, in which the audience can rely on the ironist to say the opposite of what he means. Instead, it is the unstable irony that leaves its real meaning ambiguous or at least plausibly deniable. President Trump popularized this approach by telling it like it is in a way that consistently disregards precision, if not accuracy, speaking in hyperbolic style that his followers understand not to be literal but also gospel truth. The Trump-Gaza video is ironic in this slippery sense of the word. It is the irony of saying more than you mean, like this literal golden idol of Trump in the middle of the clip, or saying what you mean in a way that no one could call serious, the twice stereotyped belly dancers with beards and whatever, or calling attention to your leader's weak points as a gesture of unconditional loyalty, like gold leaf everything. So this, again, Brooks, this is the irony that means figuratively the same thing it says literally, but in some different way that is never explained. The irony of a man who calls his wife fat and then complains that she can't take a joke. So Sola Vital and Ariel Vromen, the Los Angeles-based Israeli producers who generated Trump-Gaza, neatly captured this rhetorical position when they told NBC that their video was satire, but also not necessarily critical of Trump's proposal. In their words, unstable irony has given them a way to agree with the president, even though they know he is wrong. Okay, so here I would like to use this point because it resonates completely with some of the things that I have recently written on the mechanism and the dynamics described by the psychoanalytic notion of disavowal, which functions precisely through our explicitly acknowledging something. I know very well that this is wrong, he's stupid, whatever, while simultaneously demonstrating belief in the opposite. But still, I kind of agree with him when one disseminates this kind of thing. So the only point where I would diverge, let's say, from Brooks' analysis is that I think it should be pushed a step further. Brooks concludes that, the last quote from him, ethnically cleansing Gaza in order to develop it as a resort property may be the dumbest and the most venal idea Trump has ever had. That's the point. It is not that denizens of the MAGA internet fail to realize such an idea is bad. It's that they are keenly aware of that other people think they don't realize it is bad, so they play into that perception in order to become knowing. It's punk rock, kitsch trolling, the art of making something so stupid that other members of your subculture experience it as smart, and so on. So I really think this is a completely accurate analysis and very perceptive one. I just think that we have to add another layer here to what this practice produces. One that is precisely related to the mechanism of disavowal. Knowing that something is stupid or wrong, and yet nevertheless saying it, disseminating it, broadcasting it, ironically even, as viral videos or statements. And I think something similar happened with the famous hyperproduction of the "they are eating our pets" memes, which were, most of them were ironic, but nevertheless the statement, the fantasy was all around. So I think a further supplementary effect of this kind of irony is that it manages to, of course, familiarize us with the dumbest idea by making it circulate virally. And at the end, it doesn't look so dumb anymore, The idea is out there. It is stupid, but it is also clearly not unthinkable, since somebody did in fact come up with it and others shared it, spread it around. So nobody needs to subjectively assume or endorse the idea. Yet it begins to function as a piece of objective reality or as an objective piece of reality. It is out there. And this can have very powerful consequences, of course. It makes it possible for someone like Netanyahu to all but openly announce the realization of this video, actually, the ethnic cleansing of Gaza under the name of Operation Gideon's Chariot, a new massive ground offensive which we are now kind of on the verge of on top of everything else. And Minister Smotrich put it quite clearly, I quote, Gaza will be entirely destroyed, civilians will be sent to the south to a humanitarian zone without Hamas, and from there they will start to leave in great numbers to the countries, to other countries. So, but we really should think about it, even if coming on top of 55,000 and counting people killed in Gaza, this plan can now be openly announced, and it goes unsanctioned, it seems. I don't know if this will really change now. And this is not only because of the support of the US and other international actors for Israel, but also because, in a way, we are all already also familiar with the idea. It has been circulating for a while, precisely in the forms like this unfamous Gaza Riviera video and its unstable irony. So there is no surprise, actually, no shock, nothing new, startling, unexpected, impossible happening there. Actually, it functions like a déjà vu. And Freud wrote very interesting things about the phenomenon of déjà vu in analytical treatment, actually recognizing it as one of the prominent defense formations, that is, mechanisms which protect us from potentially traumatic, disruptive encounter that would otherwise force us to genuinely acknowledge something and shift our position. He noted how, I quote Freud, it not unfrequently happens in the course of an analytic treatment that the patient, after reporting some fact that he has just remembered, will go on to say, but I've told you that already, even though you the analyst, is sure that it is the first time the story has been shared. In other words, something that just emerged, something traumatic or disruptive, is immediately intercepted and derealized by the precipitate recognition of it as a déjà vu. We are looking directly at the traumatic event. It is right there in front of our eyes, fully acknowledged, yet it can't really get to us, affect us. I have literally 30 seconds. It is intercepted as a already well-known and in this way, in a way, boring before its meaning even or significance can even register. So we might say that the thing maintains its indifferent character by means of being cut from the possible articulation as presence in reality. This articulation appears for the first time already as a memory, recollection. And if the ethnic cleansing of Gaza has already been, as if this cleansing has already been, in a way, accomplished. So this kind of AI-generated irony, this is my conclusion, functions as an unconscious without a subject carrying out a significant work on which ruthless political powers then can cash in. It is the work that pulls us in a way into the orbit of the generated déjà vu, in which everything is possible but nothing can happen anymore to change the course of things. So yeah, we all, but obviously the Palestinians on yet another level, are now learning the hard way what it is that if you are trapped in the dream or fantasy of the other, you are indeed a fact. Thank you very much.